Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. And here for a special treat today, we have someone that is a automation expert that's been around for a while, and he also has an awesome solution that's going to help you with a lot of automation problems that we're going to touch on in this episode. And we'll be talking with Marcus Thomas all about automation in general. So you don't want to miss this episode. If you don't know, Marcus is the president of Quart Consulting Services and founded Quart in 2005 with the foresight of understanding how automation will impact every sector in this economy. And you probably see it everywhere. Software rules the world. And obviously, if we have all this software, you need to test it. So Marcus is there at the forefront, creating a test automation framework in the early 90s. It's evolved into an enterprise online solution that both governments and private sectors depend on. So as I mentioned, he has experience with testing, but so he really knows like what the challenges are. So I'm really excited to dive into today's episode. You don't want to miss this. Check it out. Hey, Marcus, welcome to the Guild.
How's it going, Joe? Nice seeing you. Nice talking to you again.
Awesome. Good to see you again. We spoke earlier in the year about automation. I thought it'd be really great to have you on the show because you have a lot of experience in this area. Before we get into it, though, Marcus, anything in your bio that I missed that you think the Guild should know more about?
No, I think you nailed it. You pretty much covered it.
Awesome. So in the pre-show, we mentioned that we both started using WinRunner, and WinRunner was kind of the forefront of automation back in the 90s, early 2000s. So I think I learned a lot from WinRunner. One of it was that, it had a certain programming language that made it kind of easier to create automation frameworks. So I'm trying to think of some of the issues we see nowadays with automation and people struggling with it. And one of them, I think, is lack of developer skills. So I'm just curious to know if that's something you see as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So WinRunner, it started the whole revolution of, being able to automate tests. And I was, thrilled to be part of that, that whole legacy that we call it now, right? So yeah, some of the problems I'm seeing right now in this era of test automation is the mindset, the shift in mindset, where we have managers and people that's in charge. They're looking to try to test faster, so they're hiring a bunch of developers to also do the testing, right? So we're kind of going back to the Y2K days where we had developers actually writing the code and also testing the code, and then all of a sudden we had this big issue, and it kind of put more emphasis back on quality assurance and testers being in control of actually validating the system is working correctly. So we fast forward now, we're in agile development, and we're now shifting left, and we've kind of mastered that. And because of that, we're making decisions now that we need to develop test cases faster, automate them faster, and we're hiring 2 development teams. So what EFAS does, it allows the ownership and the maintenance and the development of test automation, and putting that back into the hands of the testers, and putting it back into the testers' mindset. So that's what I see happening, and that's what we're trying to solve.
Awesome. Yeah, we're going to dive a little more into eFAST in a second. But before we do, it's interesting what you mentioned about development. So everyone thought it would be better. Oh, developers know how to develop code, and so they're going to write better automation. But you and I both know we started off probably as testers. So we have tester skills that a little different than developers. So when you have developers writing tests, they're not necessarily looking out for maybe edge cases that someone that has been in the testing background for a while will find. Do you find that as an issue as well, that you may have developers and maybe they'll do automation, but even if they do, their testing may not be up to par?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I see it a lot of times on the projects that I'm supporting, where as you said, a tester, developer is more tunnel vision. They're programmed that way. They're trained that way, and where testers have to look at, they have to put multiple hats on. They have to look at the system from the developer's perspective, the user's perspective, and even the tester's perspective. And what happens, I see a lot, is when a developer is developing the automation framework, they're developing in a very restrictive way where they're like, hey, they're only going to need to execute these scenarios. So we're just going to make sure we cover these scenarios. And then once the testers start executing those tests, they're like, hold up, wait a minute. We can't execute this edge case. We can't execute this test with boundary conditions, so that's where the lack of expertise come in when you have the wrong people in charge of the test automation.
Absolutely. I think you also mentioned that you almost have two development teams now: developers that create the application, developers that create the framework. And I'm not. Maybe it's just my experience. I've noticed that people that create the framework are neither good testers and neither good developers. So like they have the worst of both qualities, even though they're trying to mash. It's like they're trying to mash two together that don't necessarily fit. I don't know. Am I being down? Like you consulted a lot of companies, I'm sure. Do you see that as well?
Yes, I definitely do see it as well. And it's a really good point that you made there. So what I noticed is that that to your point where when you're trying to mash these two, the new term, right, that we kind of came up with in the industry was, SDAT, right? Software development engineers, right? And you really don't truly have that. You're either going to have a tester that's more lean into a test, or you're going to have a tester that's more lean into the development background, and that's been a problem where, where people are assigned, work to do to be able to automate their tests. They're going to have that leaning, towards one way or the other. And depending on the direction that they're leaning in, is going to impact how they go about automating that test. And the other problem is on the tester side, right? The testers do need to have some automation skills. They do need to understand how to write and write a script that's going to be reusable, that's going to be used across, be able to be sustainable across multiple releases. So, so I see a problem in both ways, but more so with the industry trending in hiring more developers to do testing.
Absolutely. So, once again, in the pre-show, we have a bunch of issues that we've seen in the field. One of them also was, now I'm not picking on Selenium, it's a lack of Selenium knowledge. So what I've seen is that a lot of times a tester is drawn to Selenium, but they need development skills in order to write nice Selenium scripts. But it's hard to find someone there's a tester that knows how to write Selenium scripts. And I have the opposite experience where I have a team of developers. I show them, hey, Selenium, you can use it. It has a language binding that you're already programming in. Shouldn't be an issue. And they just struggle for some reason writing automation scripts with Selenium. So what are your thoughts on Selenium? Is there a lack of knowledge you see around Selenium, or any downfalls you see using that approach?
Yeah. So Selenium, oddly enough, I'll be the first to admit, I stayed away from Selenium as long as I could. I was a big fan of UFT. There was obviously moving from WinRunner, and the company that took over WinRunner, they ended up developing UFT Quick Test Pro was what it was originally. Well, actually, it was actually Astra Quick Test.
Oh yeah, right. That's funny.
Yeah, then they changed the name to Quick Test Pro, and then it was UFT. And the beautiful thing that I liked about UFT, the object identification is like by far the best out there. And that kind of eased the concern of finding the right locators, right? Finding the right attributes that, you're going to use to identify and interact with the application. That is the thing that testers and developers struggle with the most. That is the biggest, cost in maintenance, is handling those locators, and Selenium lacks that totally, right? That's the biggest thing that I have against Selenium. But obviously there are a lot of pluses with it too. Absolutely.
Now, a lot of frameworks actually use Selenium under the covers. So Selenium is just an API, right? Yeah. So you need to know development skills, but there's obviously software out there that uses it under the covers for sure. But I guess another issue, even if you do kind of know programming, Selenium, is how to even approach test automation, because Selenium, you could do anything, right? So I see that as a lack in skill in not just developers, but also testers. What are your thoughts on approaching test automation, or maybe people not knowing enough how to do that?
Yeah, I see that a lot. That's the second biggest problem that I see in the industry, is now that you kind of understand how to find your locators. Okay, what do I do now with these things, right? So I know that one of the popular frameworks out there is Page Object Model. A lot of people use that, to kind of get started with it. And that requires very heavy development, a lot of understanding of how to build out the Java class. If you're writing it in Java, building out the classes and building out the methods and understanding how you can use the various different libraries. But the approach is really the most important, right? You can build automated test scripts. You can even use record and playback. But if you don't have an actual approach for how do you attack a testing and building an automation and testing an application, you're going to have major problems with, maintaining it and sustaining it. So overall, my take on automation is first identify exactly how you want to build a test automation framework that is sustainable, And
it's easier said than done for sure. So that's why I assume you probably came up with your own solution around this. So you're having me really miss WinRunner. I sound like an old guy, but I really loved WinRunner. So anyway.
Me too, man. Me too.
So you brought up another point that made me think, what I think a lot of people struggle with is, with maybe not just WinRunner, but back in the day, you had these solutions that integrated seamlessly with in an ecosystem. So you had WinRunner, talk to test director, and you were able to, know what the automation tests were validating and map things to requirements. And you kind of could do that now with open source, but it's kind of like a Frankenstein type of solution. So do you see lack of knowing what automation tests are validating when someone's creating an automated test? Are they just doing like a endless user journey, or like what are some downfalls you see people struggling with now trying to create an automated test?
Yeah, I definitely see that problem there, because we're moving in the direction where most of your automation is either record and playback, and that means you're writing and reading scripted language, or you're writing these classes that should mimic what a test case is, but it's also written in code.
Yeah.
No one but the author of that test case understands the test. So you're now trusting when that test runs in the regression suite and it passes, or if it fails, you're trusting that, the person who authored that test actually did add all the checkpoints, that is supposed to be added there. You have screenshots that you can probably capture, but is it actually completing and executing the actual test steps that the test case was intended to do? So I see problems with, I worked on a project actually, and they built out an entire framework using the page object model, and they had like 80 test cases that were written. And I asked the tester, okay, can you tell me what this test case is doing? And even when he was going through the code, he couldn't explain to me what the test was doing, right? So that's a big problem as well.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm getting agita just thinking of this. I worked on a team, like 8 sprint teams. They did automation. They didn't understand. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a bad practice, obviously, but obviously they couldn't understand what each test was doing. So they'd always write an extra test that was duplicates, or what they would do is they make a modification to a function that did the same thing, but they didn't want to break anyone else's code. So they'd create this. It was just madness. So I definitely see that as well. And I guess that gets into maintaining automation scripts, right? Because when you have this code base, a lot of times it's hard to know if you have duplication. It's hard to know if people are not using page objects correctly. So how do you approach maintaining an automation regression test suite then?
Yeah, so we use FAST. FAST is using it's an open source framework that we put out there. And it's the old classic keyword driven framework, right? I haven't seen an approach yet that beat that framework. I've tried them all. And the reason why keyword frameworks work is because you have 2 layers of abstraction, right? You have your layer of abstraction at the object level, and then you have your layer of abstraction at the test case level. And so what my experience is, when you can build out a really thorough keyword driven framework that maps down to the object in the application, a text box behaves the same in Google and as it does in Yahoo. So your lines of code that you need to maintain is very minimal, right? You're going to just maintain your actions and your objects, libraries, right? So once you have that keyword driven framework, set up, Now you're just going to associate those keywords with, the test steps that you want to execute in the test case. So that's kind of what FAST is built on. We added a few more capabilities that we also think will be helpful. Data generation is a very another key component, right? You can build all the automated test scripts, but if you start to hard code data that you need to enter into the application, that causes maintenance nightmares because you're going to be copying test scripts and trying to add data, and then you're going to have to go to, link it up to your Excel spreadsheets to get external data. So we added the ability to also auto-generate data at the object level as well. So that's one of the key things that we do with the keyword-driven framework.
Nice. I guess sometimes, a lot of times I think when people struggle with the technology, they hear keyword-driven, they're like, oh my gosh, it's from the 90s. I have this book on automation. I forgot the name of it. It's my favorite book, but it's all about keyword-driven automation, and it's great. So they put it down like, we'll just use AI, machine learning, or some sort of magic fairy to do it. So what do you say to folks that may give up that objection, like, oh, we can't use keyword driven? That's like an old approach that doesn't work.
Yeah, you know what? I had that scenario happen to me, Joe, actually. I worked on a project. I won't name the project, but I worked on a project, and they came in with this framework, and I won't name the framework because I don't want to, put any other tools down, but they came in with this other framework, and it was like, yes, you're using keywords, that's like old and antiquated, right? And they implemented this framework, and it took them about a year with, full-time developers. I would say about 3 or 4 full-time developers. It took them a year to implement what I did, with a smaller team. That were not full-time programmers, by the way, in about 3 months, right? So it took me 3 months to build out a regression suite of about 1,000 test cases in about 3 months. And it took them a year to do the same exact thing in this different framework that required all of this code. But here was the funny thing about that, Joe. So when I joined their team to kind of look and see what exactly it is that they were implementing using this framework, and I was like, holy cow, all of those things you talked about, right? You have these duplicate methods that are doing the same thing. You have these, libraries that are so written in spaghetti-like language and everything, right? And so what I ended up doing was I created my universe, and I actually called it Universal Step, right? I created my own little universe within their framework that actually use keyword-driven framework, but I use it in a way where they can build out their test script just by calling out keywords, and it saved them time. And the testers that were assigned on that project, guess what? They couldn't do anything in that old framework because they couldn't write no code, right? They can write the keyword that the framework came with, but they couldn't write the code that was behind it. So when I implemented my, FAST framework within their framework, they were able to start automating their test cases right away. And my libraries were much, much smaller, than the libraries that they had maintained. It pretty much eliminated about 70% of the code that they wrote. So what I say to that is, if you really design out a keyword-driven framework, it's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of, resources, and a lot of headache, even for the most experienced developers.
Absolutely. I guess a modern name for keyword driven nowadays is Cucumber, and you have a lot of Cucumber haters as well. So how did you develop FAST or eFAST maybe to get around some things that maybe Cucumber may be inefficient for? Do you believe in Cucumber? Is keyword driven the same? And how does FAST and eFAST maybe handle that objection then? Like, oh, Cucumber doesn't work either.
Yeah, so Cucumber is it is a very high level keyword driven framework, right? Where they give you a different way of doing keyword, right? You're using a gherkin, and that's your keyword, and that's kind of the framework that I'm kind of referring to. You develop that initial gherkin language, giving user, gives this, giving a user is doing this, or and this. And what you have to do is you have to develop those function libraries behind it, right? And that's where the manual testers or, people without programming skills struggle the most, because they initially thought, oh, we can just do this. We can just write this feature here, write this scenario, and then run it. No, you got to actually build out the code behind it. You got to build out the step definitions behind it. So what we did was we actually implemented the keywords where we would say, click, the user clicks this action on this page. right? And then what that does, that one-step definition allowed them to pretty much operate and interact with any object or in any application. So it was taking the old approach of using the keyword-driven framework and building that within the universe of the Cucumber, framework.
Well, we're on the same page. I did something similar in my company. So I had something called, the Cucumber, which is the feature file, called a business layer. And the business layer was just like a keyword. And then that keyword would call a technical layer, and that's where the code would live. So same exact approach for sure. So I guess, WinRunner was great, but I think one of the downsides was being able to run your tests anytime and anywhere. You could kind of schedule it with Test Director, but then you had to have little agents on all these machines. How does something like FAST or eFAS handle being able to run in all the places at any time, anywhere?
Yeah. So what we actually done is we have a few ways that you can actually run your test automation in eFAS and FAS. We're a big component and big fan of open source code. So we allow you to actually go out there and download our runner, our OpenFast runner, and use our OpenFast framework. And you can go out there and create a project. So the first way is just basically going out and downloading the OpenFast jar runner. It's a jar, and it's basically, a jar of our actual fast engine framework. So that's the quickest way to get started. If you wanted to start, building out some automated tests, you download our jar to your local machine or to a VM. You go to eFAS and you start creating your scripts using our keywords, using our actions. And then you run that script using it, using the OpenFast jar. That OpenFast jar resides on your machine. And then you double click the batch script and it will actually run any test script that you build from eFAS. So that's the first way. The second way is we actually developed a runner. We call it the fast runner. And this runner communicates back to the eFAS. It sends the results back to the eFAS. So that way you can maintain all of your test scripts within eFAS, run it, select the runner you want to use, and then you can run the test scripts in the cloud using our cloud runner. Or you can use it using your local runner that you have, registered on your personal machine. And once you run it, it would now send those results back to our dashboard. And now you have a dashboard that you can use and share with the project. Given the health of the application or the health of your pipeline. So there's three ways you run it: using the OpenFast jar, using the actual Maven runner that's tied to a Maven project, or using a GitLab runner that you can also kick off your pipeline. So we kind of thought through those three scenarios, and most likely those three scenarios should cover whatever way you want to run your tests.
Nice. So that was like another downside of WinRunner. I could never find a developer to install it on their machine, but it sounds like if you had a development team, you just tell them the Maven command or the Git command, and they could then run the test just like they're already running their code.
Yeah. So actually, what you do is once you register the runner on your personal machine, you go into eFAS, and when you select the test suite you want to run, you select the runner that's registered. So the eFAS automatically detects the runner that's running on the local machines. And you can see the status of that runner, whether it's online or offline. And if it's online, it will show up in the dropdown. You select it from the dropdown, and it would execute those scripts locally right there on your machine.
Awesome. So what I can't, I'm sorry, I keep going back to old times, but I'm thinking of WinRunner and Test Director. When WinRunner failed, I could code it, and then I could see in Test Director, I can see a video replay. I could see all these things of why it failed. Nowadays, using something like FAST or eFAST. So you mentioned dashboarding. Is that one of the ways that maybe you can help understand when a test failed, or what are some of the ways that using FAST or eFAST can help you understand why a test failed?
Yeah, absolutely. So FAST itself. FAST is the engine is built on top of Selenium. It creates an HTML report that gets created directly on that machine. And that HTML report will show you step by step. It also includes, you also have control over what screenshots you want to take in every step. So as you're building out your test script, you indicate, okay, I want to capture a screenshot on this step. So when you do that, it shows those screenshots in the HTML report when you open it. That same report gets built into eFAS as well. You'll be able to view it from eFAS. So if you're running your test scripts in an environment where, you know, you have VMs and your, you know, whatever reason they want to set up the scripts to run in a centralized, you know, VM that you don't have access to. Then you run it through eFAS, and that dashboard, gets updated with the same HTML report with the same screenshots. But we added another feature. We had another capability that we found very helpful. And it's kind of going into the AI stage of things, but right now in this manual, we have a feature called, you know, where it's execution run analysis. And in this feature here, and I got this from a project that I was supporting for one of the clients I was supporting, we found is that if we track and understand why our scripts fail, if we log and we kind of catalog, you know, the different types of failures that happen and catalog how we resolve those failures. Over time, we'll get an understanding of where the pain points are. We'll get an understanding of what we need to do to fix it long term, and what things that we thought fixed it did not fix it, right? So we added this capability into eFAS. We call it execution run analysis, where you can now actually, you know, add notes and track why your scripts fail. And over time, you can go back and look at that. And if a tester, you know, test script failed, they can go back and look at a history run and see, okay, this is how we fixed it in this other script here. And what we plan to do in the future with that, Joe, is, you know, we're going to make it smarter. You know, we're going to understand the failures because we capture every single error message and why it failed. We capture every single exception message that gets sent. So we'll be able to understand it and start building some capability around that.
Very cool. Once again, when I was working for a team, I know when a test failed, team fixed it, and then a few runs later, failed again, same exact error, and you're like, oh, what did I do to fix it? So we had a knowledge base. You'd search the knowledge base. It sounds like something kind of like that, but more smarter. So that sounds like a great solution for sure.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned something interesting, using Selenium under the covers. So like we said, we're not dogging Selenium. Selenium is awesome, but you need to build a lot of infrastructure on top of it. So it sounds like, can you just walk us through what we mentioned a few terms then? Selenium, you mentioned fast, you mentioned eFAST. Can you mention maybe the different parts of the solution, maybe give an example of how it all works together?
Yeah, sure. So by the way, eFAS is built to support multiple automation tools out there.
Gotcha.
You know, it was originally designed to support UFT. It still supports UFT. It also supports RFT, rational robot, you know, rational tool. So we're adding all of the various tools out there. We went with Selenium as our base because it's free, because it's open source.
Yep.
So the way that it works is eFAS. Think of eFAS as your test automation management tool. This is where you go log in and start creating your test artifacts, where you start creating your, what we call universal steps. You know, that is the first thing that you need to do, right? It gives the tester the ability to actually start creating test case shells. You know, these are the steps, these are the objects that I need to interact with in the application. So you build out those universal steps. And then the next thing you do is you want to group those steps into what we call a functional step. Right. So the classic example of that would be login, right? You know, you have to enter a username, enter a password, click the login button. So you'll group your three universal steps into a login functional step, right? Now you have a reusable login step that you can use throughout any of your test scripts. Once you build your functional steps, now you go and build out your test script. Your test script is a group of functional steps, you know, where you want to execute. So for example, if you want to build a smoke test, you'll go and build all the functional steps you need to execute that smoke test, and you'll add those functional steps to your test script. And then you build a test suite as a collection of test scripts. So eFAS is your test repository in a sense, right? It allows you to kind of build out and automate all your test cases in a very user-friendly way, in a non-coding way. We have another cool feature that we call object map, right? This builds on top of, you know, what UFT did with their object map. So we try to make it a little bit more configurable and in a way where you can configure however you want to build out your object map, whatever, regardless of what tool you decide to use, whether you're using Selenium or whether you're using UFT or whether you're using RFT, you can now build out your object map and identify with, you know, what pages you want to interact with in the application. How do you want to organize those pages? And you go and add all of your attributes for those different objects. So once you have that object map, Joe, you now have the footprint to start automating your test cases as you're manually walking through your test case. So you're walking through executing your test case, you're building those test case shells out, and you're building out the automated tests. So this is what we were thinking about, when I say, we're trying to be ahead of the curve, right? We want to have, an automation tool that can stand the times of change. Agile is a thing now, but it may not be the thing 10, 15 years from now. So instead of trying to automate the application, what we did is we automated the process in which you test an application. And that way, regardless of what technology you're using, you can still maintain and build your scripts the same way. Now, that's the test automation management side of it. We purposely designed the FAST framework to be separate from EFAS. And we did that with the intention of that, one, we wanted to be able to support any tool that comes out there. Selenium is a thing now. Cypress is slowly starting to take over, right? And, some other open source frameworks will probably come out there. So we kept the framework separate from the tool. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to provide our community with a framework that they can use right out of the box. So we decided to use Selenium for that framework, where you can go ahead and download the actual framework. It's a keyword-driven framework. The lines is probably, I would guess, probably no more than 100 lines of code right out of the box. And with that, we know that you can probably automate about 95% of your application without adding any custom code. But we also know that we have these developers, right? Developers, they want to also be able to automate. So we wanted to provide a framework that the developers might want to roll their sleeve up, or even test, automation engineers. They want to roll their sleeve up, and they want to start customizing, the framework. They want to add some new capability, to FAST and some things that we haven't thought about yet. So we wanted that framework to be separate so that they can customize it however they need to customize it, but they have an actual UI, a user interface that they can roll out to their team and say, all right, guys, I just added these new custom actions. And now you can go ahead and use these custom actions and build them into your functional steps. And they can very, very well collaborate with their team in a much organized way, where they're not having these duplicate methods or these duplicate actions and these duplicate, libraries. So that's why we designed it that way. We purposely wanted to have the framework, the actual code base, separate from the UI.
Nice. So which part of this is open source? Did you say FAST was open source?
So FAST, we have a framework called OpenFAST, and that is open source. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sweet. Do you also have a cloud solution? I think I was looking at your site. Is that something you're working on?
Yeah, eFAS is the cloud solution.
eFAST is the cloud solution. Cool, cool. Okay, Marcus, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give to someone to help them with their automation testing efforts? And what's the best way to contact you, or learn more about eFAST?
Yeah, so I would say the actionable advice I would give someone is, keep your tester's mindset when you're building out your automated test case. Because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're not trying to automate the application. You're trying to automate the testing of the application, and the end goal is to find bugs. So always keep that tester's hat on when you're building out your automated tests, when you're building out that automation framework, because that in the end is going to give the testers and the team the most flexibility in covering whatever scenarios and conditions you need to cover.
Awesome. And the best way to contact you, or learn more about eFAST?
Go to qcefast.com, and you'll see quartconsulting.com is our actual corporate site. You'll learn more about overall what we do. And qcefast.com, go out there, create a free project, and get busy with, building out and joining the automationarian community.
Thanks again for your automation awesomeness. The links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/A413. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Try for Free Today link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Labs' awesome products and services. And if the show has helped you in any way, why not rate it and review it in iTunes? Reviews really help in the rankings of the show, and I read each and every one of them. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Automation Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end, full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Automation Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes. amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.